These days, you can't even discuss the notions surrounding a virtualization infrastructure without mentioning the words highly available. And it's for that reason and others why we are actually discussing this, our third topic in the 70-414 series, coming right off the heels of our discussion back in that last course on a highly available server infrastructure. In fact, here in this course, we're going to spend all of our time kind of adding to the existing infrastructure that we've built already. We've laid down all the things that we need for storage. We've talked a bit about how to take some of those core infrastructure pieces and make them highly available. And now it's time to take that infrastructure and lay down all the bits and pieces necessary to get us into the virtualization world. You know, it's kind of funny with today's virtualization world, particularly with Hyper-V, any old IT pro with a minimum of experience can install Hyper-V all by itself. I mean, the process to get Hyper-V onto a Windows Server instance involves a couple of clicks and a couple of reboots. But getting Hyper-V installed does not necessarily a virtualization infrastructure make. I see it happen all the time. Running around and taking a look at people's environments in a consulting role, you see it happen many times where the virtualization infrastructure a person wants and the one that they have are fairly inconsistent. One reason for this is just the simple fact that bringing high availability into a virtualization infrastructure is nowhere near as trivial as just getting Hyper-V itself installed. And so here in this course, we're going to spend all of our time talking not so much about Hyper-V and the basic implementations of Hyper-V, but instead how you take Hyper-V and position it directly underneath a System Center Virtual Machine Manager instance. We'll also connect those Hyper-V servers together with storage and networking in ways that ensure that all of our connections, both to each other and to the storage itself, are highly available. If you're just joining us, this course is in fact number 3 out of 5 in this learning path for the 70-414 exam. And if you're kind of starting here in the middle, you might actually step back a couple of courses just to get through the review of all the things we've discussed here thus far. As we go through this course, I'm going to assume that you've watched all the previous courses up to this point because we've got a bit of infrastructure laid into place that will facilitate us building the things we're going to talk about here. This learning path started with a quick introduction on the MCSE and the 70-414 R2 exam. That intro course, if you haven't seen it, talks very specifically about the kind of exam that the 7414 is and how, in comparison with many of the other exams you've probably taken up until this point, the 414 focuses very specifically on when to do things as opposed to what to do. So you'll find us here talking about not so much the buttons you necessarily need to click, but the decisions that you need to make when it comes time to actually build things like a virtualization infrastructure. With that intro out of the way, we then spent an entire course here talking about a highly available enterprise infrastructure, which discussed a variety of topics that typically in most enterprise infrastructures need to be made highly available. Again, storage, core services, and so on. It is these two courses that bring us to our course here on a server virtualization infrastructure. And it's here you'll find that we have actually quite a large number of things that we need to discuss. In fact, when we're looking at these 6 different modules that make up the course here, one of the things I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind is how little an amount of time we're going to spend with Hyper-V itself. The topics here on planning and implementing virtualization hosts, those dealing with the networking and storage, the process of building virtual machines and moving those virtual machines around, and then managing and maintaining that virtualization infrastructure that we create, all of these topics here focus very heavily on the ways in which VMM can manage that Hyper-V infrastructure. And so what you'll find is we'll spend almost all of our time here within VMM, as opposed to in the Hyper-V Manager console itself. And that is actually a good thing, because working with VMM can be a little idiosyncratic. This tool has gotten quite a bit better over the years, and this version of VMM is perhaps the most stable, and perhaps also the easiest to use from previous versions. But even considering those improvements, there are a couple of places in VMM where there's some absolute gotchas that you just have to know if you want to be successful. I also, at every step along the way, want to help you with building that VMM and Hyper-V infrastructure in a way that is also highly available. So we'll talk not only about how to connect servers to storage, but we'll talk about how to connect servers to storage in a highly available way, using things like MPIO, using things like multiple connections. We'll talk about how to connect to highly available SMB3 storage and how to use our networks in ways that allows those virtual machines to be moved around so they themselves are highly available. So while this course talks about implementing a virtualization infrastructure, you can immediately assume that this also talks about a highly available virtualization infrastructure. Now, just to review what we talked about back in that introductory course where we were introducing the 7414 content, I want to spend just a minute or here kind of talking about the virtualization infrastructure that we intend to create, or that we actually will be creating. As you can see here, I've got a variety of different machines that we're going to bring online, or actually that I have online already. We will begin with here on our desktop, just connecting up to our VMM infrastructure on that server VMM. VMM, as you probably know, is a System Center component that allows you to manage Hyper-V instances. And with that management of Hyper-V instances, we will instruct the Hyper-V machines to do their job. We'll instruct them to connect to our failover cluster, our storage cluster, in order to connect to the storage that they require. We'll instruct them also to connect directly to our SAN storage so that we can get access to the iSCSI storage that we've built. That file server cluster itself also connects to our SAN storage here as well to support the disks that we'll use for SMP3 storage. And everything connects back to storage itself, or the disks, where our virtual machines are going to lie. Now this creates a whole lot of arrows here, as you can see on the diagram, but I introduced this here just to give you an idea of the minimum level of complexity that you probably are going to have to implement should you want to build a highly available virtualization infrastructure. Throughout the next couple of hours, I hope to demystify a lot of these arrows for you so that at least you have a comfort level in building this VM infrastructure, not only for the exam, but when it comes time to put one actually into production. So that is our goal here, is to build this VM infrastructure and essentially get it ready to go so that we can deploy virtual machines and build ourselves a Windows Server 2012 R2 virtualization infrastructure. Coming up next, we will begin this process by taking a look at our Hyper-V hosts themselves, and we'll accomplish most of these tasks directly within VMM. We'll take a look at how hosts are pulled into VMM. We'll take a look at host groups and how those host groups can define some major properties for our Hyper-V hosts. We'll look at hosts from other vendors as well, like VMware and Citrix. We'll optimize the resources on those hosts, prepare them for the running of virtual machines, and we'll take a quick look at the VMM library and get a feel for how that library, whether on one server or multiple servers, can provide us access to the objects that we'll require to later build our virtual machines. That discussion on Hyper-V hosts is the topic for our next module, coming up.